Children and families are in crisis. More than ever, they're being exposed to violence, abuse and neglect. And the fallout is devastating. Welcome to Stories from Berry Street, a podcast that explores how one of Australia's largest independent children and family services organisations dedicates itself to keeping children, young people and families safe, thriving and hopeful. I'm your host, Richelle Hunt. Join me as I talk to some extraordinary people at Berry Street and discover the realities of working in child protection and family violence spaces, the incredible work that's being done to address the rising tide of harm and violence, and what we as a community can do to help.
What the system really needs is a significant investment in money to support providers like Berry Street to be able to come up with new models of care to meet these really unique needs of these children.
That's James Stubbs, Director of Berry Street's Northern Region. A social worker for 20 years, James has worked with children and young people for most of his career. As thousands of children and young people across Australia can't live safely at home, the pressure on out-of-home care models like kinship care, foster care and residential care is crushing. Berry Street is innovating in this space by rolling out the evidence-based teaching family model across its residential care program, which we've covered on this podcast in episode 5. But while it's very effective, it's also expensive. So, can Berry Street find a program to care for traumatised young people and maximise their recovery in a sustainable way? Absolutely. And the program is called PIC, Professional Individualised Care, and it's currently running in New South Wales. But implementing PIC in Victoria is not a simple exercise. I'll speak to James about what PIC is and what it could mean for Berry Street and the many children and young people in need of extra special care right now. I also talked to Jarrod Wheatley, the CEO of PIC in New South Wales, about the success he's had and the challenges that still lie ahead for a widespread rollout of the program. But I start my chat with James to find out more about what traditional out-of-home care is.
Out-of-home care system has many different components, but essentially what people need to understand is that the state government has decided that children aren't able to live with their parents for a period of time, and then they come into different types of care arrangements. So that might be kinship care, which is often family members or people that are known to children. It could be foster care, where there's volunteers who are putting their hand up to look after children. And then another large component of our care system is what we call residential care, which is where we have paid staff working with young people in a home, usually about 4 young people at a time, and that's generally for older teenagers that we work with.
And what trends have you been seeing in out-of-home care?
So over the years, there's been a huge increase in the numbers of children coming into out-of-home care. Kinship care is really the largest portion of our care system, but what we're seeing in foster care is a real reduction in the number of people that are willing to put their hand up and open their hearts and their homes to kids coming in to be cared for. So I'd say one of the most stressed parts of our system at the moment is our foster care system, and we're seeing more and more highly traumatised children that have experienced different types of abuse, family violence, sexual abuse and neglect, and they're coming to us into our out-of-home care system really needing specialist input in trying to help them recover from the trauma that they've experienced.
The sharp decline in carer numbers within the foster care system has challenged child and family service providers like Berry Street to find new, effective solutions. Whether it's MST or multi-systemic therapy program, which we explored in episode 7, or a program like PIC, Berry Street is innovating, not only to keep children and families safe, but to change the shape of the service system and redistribute support so pressure doesn't continue to bottleneck. In the meantime, what is James's view as to why foster carers aren't putting their hands up?
I think there's a number of different reasons for it. At the moment, foster care, it does cost people money. So there is a reimbursement model for foster carers, but it doesn't really cover the true cost of looking after a child. I think at the moment we've got a huge amount of pressure financially on a lot of families. People's ability to be able to afford to have a spare bedroom in their home, maybe for one parent or someone to maybe work part-time or not at all, is just reduced, I think, from what it used to be in the past. So often people are being foster carer, they're volunteering their time on top of already busy lifestyles and busy things going on, and people just don't have the capacity to. There are still a portion of incredible people that do it, but we're just seeing a reduction in the numbers that do want to do that.
What would change that, do you think?
I think what the system needs, we've got these very small programs that are very designated and really don't meet the unique needs of children that are coming into care with us. They're quite rigid in their approach, and it means that we're not always able to kind of cater to their individual needs. So I think that the system, being where it's at the moment, it requires a number of different things that need to change to really impact the children's lives.
I've learnt and said the word the system more than any other time in my life whilst doing this podcast. So let's talk about the system. Can you give us an example of how, despite huge investment and everybody's best efforts, the system isn't actually working for young people and for children? Why?
An example that firstly comes to mind is a recent one where we've had a sibling group of 5 that needed a care option for us, and that means that they come from child protection and then they come to an organisation like Berry Street and say, how can you help this family? We've got 5 kids that all need places to be. What can you do?
From the same family?
Yes, from the same family. And what then happens is what I could only describe as like a patchwork quilt of how we're going to support these kids. Very regularly, these kids move into different homes, so they might be spread across multiple homes. In our foster care system at the moment, we have a lot less foster carers that are willing to take on big sibling groups, but also for really long periods of time. So it might be a week here, 2 days there, a weekend there. And what happens is that it fractures the relationships between the young people or the children. And in that family, that's exactly what happened. What we know about children that are coming into care, they often have issues with attachment, which means they find it difficult to form relationships with people. Often those relationships that they've had in their past haven't been safe for them. So their ability to form relationships is really hampered. And so what the system is doing at the moment is moving those children around from place to place. And what it tells them is that no one cares for me and there isn't anyone out there that can meet my needs. And I think what is happening is we're getting a traumatised group of kids that are coming in and we're re-traumatising them by the way that the system is currently operating.
How do you change that, though? I mean, is it rare to have 5 children from one family needing a home, or is that relatively common?
I think that it is relatively common that happens. That's just one example. And, I could give you so many. There's problems with smaller groups of, siblings coming in. I think one of the pressures that we've got at the moment is when we have young people who have what we would describe as complex support needs. That might mean that they have experienced trauma that I mentioned earlier. So that might be from violence or abuse that they've experienced. They also have a disability. They might also have some other learning needs, and then they struggle to attach. And so you can imagine for these children, they're coming into a volunteer's home often when they're coming into foster care, and these are incredible people. Like, I take my hat off to them. I could never do it myself. They are unbelievable in what they do, but they aren't professionals. They haven't often had years of training in university like a social worker or a psychologist. We do have people like that in our foster care system, but it's not the majority, and often they're juggling full-time work as well as their care arrangements.
I can't help but think that finding people who tick all of those boxes is going to be extremely challenging. Berry Street offers the Teaching Family Model, or TFM, which, as we examine in episode 5, is a globally recognised, evidence-based model that helps kids live successfully in a family, home-style environment. Why could this not be the solution?
The current care system is really like trying to take a square peg and put it in a round hole. There isn't an option or a model that really meets the needs of the children that we have in our out-of-home care system at the moment. being able to go out and see our homes that are running that teaching family model, I'm really proud of the work that our staff are doing with those young people, and it is incredible to see that. What residential care finds difficult to do is provide individual needs of young people. And we have some young people that can live with other young people, and it's a really important part of their recovery and healing journey that they learn to live with other young people. But putting often 4 traumatised young people in the same home with paid staff is not always the best way of providing care to them. And our staff do an incredible job in meeting their needs in an as individual way as possible. But the way that the system is funded and designed, it's really not possible to meet all children's needs. And what we're really needing is different types of care arrangements in our out-of-home care system.
And you have the solution, don't you? It's PIC, or Professional Individualised Care. But please explain how this program better meets the needs for kids facing harm, neglect or violence.
This is our hope for the future. So professional individualised care is an innovative model of out-of-home care that privileges a child or young person's needs and autonomy, putting them at the centre of all decision-making. Through PIC, a child or young person is matched to live in a home with a PIC carer, what we're calling professional therapeutic carers. As I say, it's a hope for the future because we haven't actually started running the model yet. We're working closely with the state government to try to introduce this new form of care into our out-of-home care system.
What will be so different about it? Why is this your hope for the future? How will it change people's lives?
So what PIC does is take a professional, so often a social worker, a youth worker, a psychologist, maybe an adventure therapist, and we pay that person a full-time wage to stop working in our sector, so stop working as a caseworker, working with often up to 15 young people at one time, and we say, we just want you to care for one young person. And we want you to have all of the things that you need to be able to care for that one person. And part of that is giving them the time away from professional paid work to give all of their efforts and energy into looking after one young person.
When you talk about trust, and earlier you were saying often that young person who's had lived experience of trauma, of abuse, they haven't been able to trust someone. From what I can gather, PIC will change that entire concept because the young person has someone with them all the time and someone that they can trust and get to know and bond with over a period of time. Is that what makes it so unique?
We call it in the sector, it's a relational model. And the best way of describing that is thinking about ourselves. We all thrive off relationships, whether that's with a partner, with a friend, with someone at school, with a teacher. Relationship is key for all of us. And what the evidence shows us is that if we can provide one safe, long-term relationship for a child or young person that's coming through our out-of-home care system, it is the best determinant for them to have a successful life after their time in care. And what PIC does is allow an opportunity for a young person to form a really strong, safe and long-term relationship with a professional who understands their trauma, who understands their developmental needs, has been working in the industry for years and understands the system that they've grown up in, and gives them that time and space together to really thrive and recover from the trauma and attachment issues that they've experienced.
Of course, the state government will be the arbiter of whether PIC will eventually run in Victoria and in what form. While cost will be a consideration, so will the real-world benefits the program is already having in New South Wales and overseas. So, how responsive have the state government been so far?
The state government are really interested in the model. The model's already running in New South Wales and has been for a number of years now. And then prior to it running in New South Wales, the model was first developed in Germany and has been running over there for over 30 years, and it's their most successful form of out-of-home care. So we're not coming up with, a new model that hasn't been tried and tested and even used in our own Australian context. It's just something that we're wanting to introduce to Victoria, and we're wanting to be the first organisation that does that. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest the model works, and the state government have been incredibly receptive to hearing about that. There's probably some policy and legislative things that we're working through with them at the moment, because what PIC does is really ask us as a system, and I say the system being part of Berry Street, Child Protection, the department all together, in really wanting to think about things differently, because we know we need to provide a really unique experience for a small portion of the young people that are coming into our care system.
Now's never been, I guess, a more apparent time to have that conversation as well. I think the community is ready, that everyone is ready to try something different, because the system hasn't been working. We're seeing young people in and out of incarceration, in and out of trouble, in and out of care. Is it time for something new?
Absolutely. And what our young people deserve is different models of care that meet their needs. We don't have unique ways of caring for kids, and what the system really needs is a significant investment in money to be able to support providers like Berry Street to be able to come up with new models of care to meet these really unique needs of these children.
So what process did Berry Street go through to decide that PIC was the right solution?
Yeah, it's been an absolute journey for us, and it's been going on for a number of years. One of my colleagues, Alison Cox, who's our director of Take Two, she first heard about the model years and years ago. I'd say it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. And she was talking to the then Children's Commissioner for Australia around out-of-home care. We know it's not working in Victoria. What models have you seen work around Australia? And she pointed to PIC and said, it's working, PIC. You need to learn more about this model. So Alison reached out at the time to PIC to learn a little bit more. She'd also heard about it from some of her industry colleagues as well and started to explore it. But Berry Street wasn't ready at that time to really invest in it and invest in the time in understanding what it would look like for the Berry Street context. So we probably put things on hold for a number of years. And then in conversations with myself and another colleague, we started to get that fire of excitement again around wanting to innovate, wanting to do things differently. And it led us to reaching out again to our colleagues up in New South Wales. So their organisation is called Professional Individualised Care. That's all they run. And Jarrod, their CEO, has been incredibly generous with his time and efforts in supporting Berry Street to understand the model, to learn about it. They've had some time coming down and staying with us in Victoria. We've had some time going up to New South Wales. And like the model demands, I talked about relationships before. We needed to relationally get on before we knew whether this model was going to fit for all of us as well. So we spent a lot of time getting to know each other, getting to know carers that are providing this up in New South Wales at the moment and staff that work up there as well, before really realising and understanding, is this model going to be right for Berry Street and right for Victoria, and most importantly, right for the young people that we're really finding particularly difficult to meet their needs.
So what will it take then for Berry Street to get this off the ground, do you think?
There's a couple of things we need to do. I think as an organisation, we need to continue to stay focused and committed to the model. It's easy with our jobs to get focused on what's happening today and tomorrow and trying to put out the spot fire that's happening in our foster care placements or in our residential care homes. We need to continue to aspire to want to do different and want to do innovative things, and PIC is absolutely that. So we need to continue to work with government to get their support in wanting to introduce a model of care like this. The other thing we're wanting support with is raising funding. So we do need some funding to be able to develop the model further, to be ready to take on that first placement. And the way the model works, I think once we get our first few young people into the program, the model will be self-sustaining, but we are going to need that support. You might call it seed money. It's really the building blocks of the program to kind of take it where it is at the moment, which is an idea and a concept and something we're excited about, to actually being able to start looking after children.
So then what does the future look like for young people and for children if this is successful, if PIC does get off the ground?
I think it's important to know that PIC isn't this magic bullet that's going to absolutely fix the system, and it's not going to meet the needs of all children in care. That's not what this model does. what it does do is provide an opportunity for a young person who isn't having their needs met within the current system a shot at recovery of true relationship and a pathway forward. And so I think as a system, we spend a lot of time actually working with a small number of young people that we find most difficult, and they're our most traumatised young people. They've experienced the most horrific abuse. They are often the young people that maybe are coming into contact with the criminal justice system. They're coming into contact with our drug and alcohol system, our mental health system. So you can imagine these young people spend a lot of money for the taxpayer in terms of the community cost for them, because at the moment we don't have a model that's meeting their needs. So I truly believe that once we have this model up and running, we can provide these types of care for young people. We'll see a huge improvement in the overall system because it takes off a significant amount of pressure at the pointy end. And ultimately, that's going to improve the lives of the young people that come into contact with the program.
I mirror the hope James has for PIC coming to Victoria. Sure, it will be a challenge to navigate Victorian government requirements, but the success of the program speaks for itself. Let's go to my chat with Jarrod now, CEO of PIC New South Wales, and get his perspective on the program and why he decided to bring it over from Germany.
So PIC, it's a model of out-of-home care that's actually modelled off a German model of care that's been operating there for over 3 decades. At the heart of the model, what we're doing is placing a child in the home of a professional therapeutic carer. So what this means for a young person is you've actually got someone that can appropriately respond to complex trauma and attachment needs, but really significantly also someone that can offer real connection and relationship. And that's at the heart of the model. It's about saying, unless we can offer some of these kids that have maybe bounced through our foster care system and have had 40 or 50 different homes, and then they've often been into group homes or hotels, environments where they're cared for by shift workers. And as long as they've got adults moving in and out of their life in that way, they don't have the relational consistency, the relational permanency to drop out of hypervigilance, which is a fancy way to say effectively that fight, flight, freeze response. And as long as you have children that body are filled with those stress hormones that aren't sure who's going to be there for them, we can't really do that work of helping them understand their past and heal from trauma and move forward. So that's really the heart of the model, is it isn't reproducing clinical medical concepts of care in a home environment, but rather actually working with real relationships and connections with people that just have the skill set in order to say to a child, hey, we've got you, we can stick through this first year. Then we can be looking at therapeutic interventions that really help you move forward. And at year 2 and 3, we start to see those behaviours shift and how they are in the world shift. But it's not a behavioural model coming in to fix kids. It understands people's agency, and it's maybe a far more humble or human approach about just saying, can we find people that can journey with through these kids? And we're confident enough that if we get that right, we see lives change.
So you mentioned you worked with the PIC model in Germany, but in New South Wales, how did the organisation begin using PIC? How did that come together?
I spent the first couple of years after returning from Germany with this kind of a fever in me of going, hey, I've seen something, that works. It's had twice the success rate of any other model of out-of-home care in Germany over 3 decades. Case studies with 40,000 plus children. Like, we can be really sure this is a better approach than group homes or any model that's using shift workers as its primary interface with children. And I thought it'd be as simple as going to a lot of other providers in New South Wales and saying, hey, I speak German, I speak English, I understand both these cultural approaches, and I can help set it up. And I did that for a while until I realized that the risk profile in this space to be able to change and run new models, you really need a brave organization that's going to step into that. And I wasn't successful in finding other orgs to do it. So it kind of came to that point where I was like, well, if no one else is going to do it, I better set up an organization to do it. And then even after that, it took me another couple of years to really start to have the first young people come into care.
Given the challenges that face organisations that choose to take on the PIC program, I asked Jarrod what it meant when Berry Street, an organisation with a 150-year heritage of working to keep children and families safe, put up their hand and said, we want to implement this. We want to take this on.
It's something that when we're talking about relationship-based practice, it's really easy to understand that it's just about the relationship between this carer and a child. But actually relationship-based practice goes the whole way. It's between the coordinator and their manager, or in this case, it's between myself and Berry Street. So what we're looking for to find partners that we can actually work with to help them set up the model, it's about, is the relationship there? Is there enough trust there to know that people understand the background of this model and aren't just looking to copy, say, the foster care allowance structure and then still operate what is effectively foster care in the same way. But the problem there is, you can imagine if you have a crisis at 6 p.m. and the foster care picks up the phone but they can't reach someone that they already know, they'll reach an after hours number and they'll have someone come in a car they don't know to pick up the child that they don't know and take them to a respite setting they don't know. So you can't just copy one aspect of this model and then hope to get drastically different results. It has to be partnering with people that have understood the culture that's behind it. And for all of us, we're on that journey, but meeting the people in Berry Street, that's over years of conversation to really see from their senior executive and even at a board level to understand that they're brave enough to say, let's try something different. But it's a fundamentally different paradigm you're operating out of. And it really has then implications right across your service delivery system if you want to work in this relational way.
How do you go about changing something that's been in place for a long time and it is run by ticking boxes, by paperwork, and you take all of that away and say, all right, look, we're doing this completely differently?
Some of it is understanding that the system has imperatives. There are certain things that the system says is non-negotiable, we absolutely need. And from a starting point of saying, okay, we understand that accountability is important. And so a lot of this paperwork, it's terrible if you see it as a parenting tool. Like anyone listening to this, if they think of their own child, are you guys doing an annually reviewed health plan? Are you doing an annually reviewed case plan? Case being the word here, your child, a case. But, are we using these as parenting tools? Are you doing case notes? And the answer is no. I've not met a family yet that's doing those things. So they're terrible tools if we understand them through the lens of saying this is about improving a child's life. However, what they are there to do, and they do meet a need in the system, is around documenting actions taken and accountability. So if everyone pictures a staircase going up, and our job is to help get kids from the bottom of the stairs up into independence and into life, we have to walk with them up the staircase. And if you put in 1 or 2 handrails, that's a little bit of paperwork. That actually makes the system safer and easier to get up. Yes, do working with children's checks. Yes, if the system needs to see something, be transparent. But if we've had successive inquiries saying the system isn't working, and our only answer after each inquiry is to up the amount of regulation, we end up with a staircase that's got 37 handrails across it, and everyone at the bottom of the stairs going, I wonder why we can't get kids up this staircase anymore. And our only idea tends to be looking for more safety for anxious adults by putting in handrail number 38. That system fundamentally is never going to work. Doesn't matter what we call it, which acronym. If we've got a system where we're spending the vast majority of our time and resources on meeting the system's need through paperwork, we're not going to be able to build people's capacity and have the time and presence around a dinner table sometimes to sit and listen and say, what's going to change your life and how can I be a part of helping?
Is that the main barrier, do you think, is that as a society we want those handrails and without them we feel scared, whether it be us as individuals, the system, the policymakers, whoever it is? What are the barriers to trying something different?
Absolutely. For anyone, it's going to be a natural response if we talk about child mistreatment. For everyone to feel a bit uncomfortable, right, to clench. And if we say, there's this many thousand children in our system that are experiencing these poor outcomes because of the models we're implementing, that makes people even more uncomfortable. And when we're uncomfortable, we often look for safety. It's a normal human response. And one thing that paperwork does do is do an excellent job of providing adults safety and security in a holding environment. So it's not to say that we can't have any of it, but it has to be an appropriate level, and we first have to serve our stated value. And if we have a story that we're here for children and here for families, then that is absolutely what we have to put first. And the good news is, if you do that, you get a different type of holding environment for those frontline staff because they're connected to purpose. And they see the results and it's helping, we actually need less of that security that otherwise a risk-benefit analysis might be giving. But I'll just use this as that last example of going, I've never met the 15-year-old that sat me down and said, Jarrod, you know what's changed my life? Was this awesome risk-benefit analysis someone did for me when I was 14. I've never met that kid. They're going to tell you it was Jane or it was Tom. So if we understand this as a fundamental principle, the only direction forward to make progress is we have to put those relationships back at the heart of the system. If we do that, it's better for taxpayers, it's better for frontline workers, it's certainly better for families and children that are interacting with our system. So that's really the key message.
In the 10 years or so that Jarrod has spent researching PIC in Germany and developing the program for New South Wales, he's seen the impact on scores of children. So what has he noticed? And how different are the outcomes for kids using the PIC system versus traditional models of out-of-home care, for instance?
I think the easiest way to describe that is for people to imagine what it would feel like for themselves if you've gone through 50 different foster homes. What it would feel like to hear that many times that you can't live somewhere, and then what it would feel like if you're placed into an environment where you're getting raised by shift workers that are operating under a doctrine of professional distance. So we would say absolutely nothing wrong with clinical medical concepts of care in that context. However, using it as the primary mechanism to raise children, that means no one's giving you a hug often in those environments. It means that you probably don't know who's rocking up tomorrow after you sleep. So for children that are going through that, we can expect they'll be in hypervigilance. Like I was saying, that fight, flight, freeze, you're in survival mode a lot of the times.
Zero trust.
Yeah. And what does it look like if we can get it right? And no one has a guaranteed way, including PIC, to guarantee relationships will work. But if you invest in them, and if you open your service to hold that as the heart of the intervention is about creating that trustful relationship, what you find is the vast majority of people do something absolutely incredible, which you just can't understate, which is they rewire their brain. They believe in connections again.
So what have you witnessed over that period? Because it's quite a long time. What are some of the outcomes? What are some of the changed circumstances that you've seen play out in a young person's life?
The first one that comes to mind as you asked me that is a young person who literally turned 18 this week. Wow. He entered the model when he was 12. So that's a long time. But, that typical thing, he'd gone through many different foster homes and then he'd gone through a number of different group homes. And in that, he came and he was living with some carers of ours who lived out on a farm. And, education didn't work. He was chronically suspended from school, pretty much figured out if you pick up a star picket and go running at people, you'll always get suspended. And if you don't want to go to school, that's a formula that can work pretty well. And it was so incredibly tough for those carers and for him to break that. But once it was broken through, school was never going to be the answer for him. But they paid a local farm supply store, which he loved working at. It was drastically different there. He wanted to be there. And based on that, he loved all of the big trucks and the excavators that were there at those sites. A totally different kid if you see him in that context. And the carer's husband ended up actually leaving their painting business so they could go every day with him to an apprenticeship to help him in that apprenticeship. He needed that for some time. Then he was able to complete the apprenticeship by himself. He's turning 18 now. He's probably going to be on more money than me. Am I allowed to say that? He's doing all this overtime and he's got a job. He's got a work car. They've built a granny flat out on that farm of those carers.
Really?
And he owns that. It's like one of these things he'll be able to pick up if he does have land later and replace. But what is it interesting?
So that relationship is long term.
Yeah, he's living there and, he's still got those connections and those support. And we recently had a young woman now just placed with the same couple, and she asked him, who is your caseworker? And he looked at her like, I don't have a caseworker. Because he's like, oh, I know this person that comes around, they have dinner with us. But he was so out of the system at that point that a new young person coming in to live with that family, there's no logos at PIC that rock up to houses. And ultimately, we're not trying to raise children through these annually reviewed plans that no parent in their own life would think that's how you raise a child. You don't need a meeting needs plan or a case plan to tell you how to be there and walk alongside these children. And, in a similar response that for him, it probably feels like he's not in out-of-home care. He's just got a bunch of supportive adults in his corner that have walked with him.
It's long-term relational care like this that's at the core of PIC. And while PIC alone isn't the silver bullet for all of the challenges facing the out-of-home care system, for certain young people, it's achieving tremendous results and striking a chord with many professionals, as Jarrod explains.
Yeah, so there's 46,000 children across the country that are in out-of-home care. And no one's suggesting, I'm certainly not, that we're going to find 46,000 social workers to care for these kids. Ultimately, the future of the sector really needs to be leaning into family preservation, early intervention, so we can work with families to not have removals take place. For some children that can't live at home, they need to be living with family, grandparents. And then for other children, we might need specialised services like foster care. There's an even smaller percentage that at any given time that are really at that pointy end, that are being cared for in environments that no one would want to see their own child live in, these shift work models. For those children, there are plenty of people out there that could be putting up their hands to do this work. And in a time when it's notoriously difficult to find foster carers, PIC as an organisation has never had that problem. We had a recent media article, I won't say where, but we had 76 applications of professionals wanting to work for us.
So when you say professionals, you mean they're already trained in the sector? They're already social workers or they have a background?
That's right. So mainly counsellors, social workers, psychologists, but would say anyone that actually has industry recognised qualifications in the professional skill set, because every now and again you do get someone like a mental health nurse or someone that might not be strictly from the sector, but they understand trauma, they understand attachment, and more than the qualification, these are people that just have life experience, right? And that's what the kids actually interact with or feel. They don't feel, is it someone intervening, or is it someone that just actually has that embodied lived experience that can provide that?
Do you have hope for the future of this model of care, PIC, for Australia, that it's not just something, yes, you've brought it back from Germany, you've implemented it in New South Wales, Berry Street is implementing it. Is this something that can be bigger than what it currently is?
Absolutely, is the short answer. And I think it's working with Berry Street. It's exciting when you see organisations that are really grappling with not only the model and, the easy things to understand, like find people that have great qualifications and pay them enough so they can leave their job, but also, organisations like Berry Street that are saying, let's actually really grapple with and implement and understand what's sitting behind the model, the concepts. And I might just touch on a few of them, because when we're thinking about what is the future and how do you expand this model, it's really easy to think about that it's just a question of scaling. Saying, let's find more carers, let's get more children in this model. And while that is also positive and something we should absolutely do, it's not the complete answer. And I think it's looking at how are we as a sector, what are we spending our time on? And if the answer is 80% paperwork and 20% of the time with people, it's unlikely that any model we look to implement is going to give people a different lived experience. So we have to redirect our time regardless of the model that we're working in. And PIC is an example of how you can work. But I think relational practice generally, and that's more my work under the banner of the Centre for Relational Care, but saying let's redirect our time for people that are on the front line to spend time with children, which means shifting a lot of the paperwork that we're doing that's really about the system's needs and not about children's needs. I think there's a huge part in the future of looking at the methodologies that we're using of how we understand our work. So right now, we're often measuring what our success is by things the system can find easy to measure rather than what people in the system tell us is meaningful. So we have to start asking children and carers and family, are we doing a good job? And using that as the primary mechanism to understand our own practice. And lastly, we've already touched on it, but this sense of we have to actually put real relationships back at the heart of the intervention, which is to say that we need people that can put up their hands and say, hey, I've got the skill set, I'd love to do this work, but I'm actually going to offer a real connection. I think if we do those things, the future's bright, because you're addressing the barriers that not only can derail a model like PIC, but that can help our work right across the social sector and certainly across out-of-home care turn to relational practice over the system's needs.
Look, to me, it's a no-brainer, but I don't make the laws in Victoria. What I will say is that the pressure on the child protection system is not decreasing, despite record levels of investment. And while guardrails are necessary to prevent bad outcomes, sustainable change is needed if we're going to meet the needs of our most vulnerable young people. Meaningful discussion and taking active steps to roll out PIC for children and young people at risk in Victoria will be a real game changer. You've been listening to Stories from Berry Street, a podcast for Berry Street, produced by Sound Cartel. Find out more about how you can support Berry Street at berrystreet.org.au. Listen out for more episodes on everything from childhood neglect, addressing family violence, and early intervention. Subscribe free wherever you listen to podcasts. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic, family or sexual violence, please contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800 737 732. This podcast is recorded on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and Berry Street acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the lands, skies and waterways across Australia.